In the 1990s, the world faced a landmine crisis. Every year, around 25,000 people, 4 in 5 civilians and 1 in 3 children, were maimed or killed by a silent, indiscriminate, and long-lasting weapon from beneath the earth. This weapon is the anti-personnel landmine. These anti-personnel mines took minutes to lay and cost as little as $3 to produce, and could remain deadly for decades. Between 60 and 80 million mines were already laid across more than 70 countries. Each year, 10 million landmines were produced and 2.5 million laid against 80,000 cleared. So in the fall of 1997, after years of international activism, the world came together in Ottawa, Canada to stop the spiral. In a rare moment of unity, 122 countries signed a treaty now informally known as the Ottawa Treaty that banned the use, production, stockpiling, and transfer of victim-activated anti-personnel landmines and committed to an anti-personnel landmine-free world. Since then, Ottawa saved tens of thousands of lives and lives. 87 countries destroyed their mine stockpiles, more than 55 million landmines were eliminated, 33 once contaminated countries were declared mine-free, tens of thousands of square kilometers of land has been cleared and returned to local communities, number of landmine-producing countries reduced from 48 to 11, and most importantly, landmine casualties have been reduced from a 90s peak of around 25,000 to around 5,000 per year. However, the battle is not over. 32 countries, among them the United States, China, Russia, Pakistan, and India, have not signed the treaty, and this year 6 countries, Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Ukraine, have withdrawn from the treaty, citing national security. In other countries like Turkey, the treaty is still a debated issue. So, in this video, I will explain what anti-personnel landmines are, why they were banned, why they should stay banned, common arguments for withdrawing from or not signing the Ottawa, and what can you do for a mine-free world. First, what is an anti-personnel landmine? An anti-personnel landmine is a victim-activated mine designed to be used against humans instead of vehicles, like an anti-tank mine. First examples of anti-personnel mines date back to 13th century China. Landmine technology progressed alongside explosives technology for centuries. However, first widespread use of anti-personnel landmines happened in World War II, in the open fields of Eastern Europe and the deserts of North Africa. Tens of millions of mines were laid during the conflict, with the most infamous examples being the Battle of Kursk by the Soviet Union, where they laid 1 million mines in 8 belts with an overall depth of 35 kilometers, and by Nazi Germany in Second Battle of El Alamein, where they laid 3 million mines across the entire battlefield, and those mines to this day still hinder development and take lives in the Matruk governorate of Egypt 83 years onwards. After World War II, landmine development continued on. Millions of landmines were used in Korea and still divide the peninsula to this day as a part of the DMZ. More were used to divide Europe with the Iron Curtain. Throughout the Cold War, landmines saw extensive use around the globe, especially in developing nations, and by the 1990s the situation was out of control. Mine laying was a problem after World War II, but it became a truly global phenomena that affected almost every country in the world that was going through a conflict after 1980 and before 2000 that Ottawa came into effect. 7 out of the 10 most contaminated countries on Earth were contaminated between 1980 and 2000. From the Iran-Iraq War to the Angolan Civil War, from the Yugoslav Wars to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, tens of millions of mines were laid. This closed off large swaths of territory, tens of thousands of kilometers, to communities directly affected from conflict, and caused huge losses in productivity and also morale and cultural importance. For example, in Cambodia, many Buddhist temples were rendered inaccessible because of heavy mining. The case of children was especially tragic, as they often mistook landmines with their bright metal casings and butterfly wings for toys, and therefore made up 1/3 of landmine casualties globally. Despite this, millions of landmines were added to the existing ones each year, and world needed to do something about the crisis. Long before Ottawa, the ethical implications and legality of landmines were called into question by multiple international treaties and organizations. First step came in 1977 when Geneva Conventions Protocol 1, in which indiscriminate attacks against civilians and food, water, and other materials needed for survival was banned. This included not only direct attacks against civilian targets, but crucially, technologies for scope of destruction cannot be limited. As landmines are victim activated and cannot distinguish between a soldier or a civilian or an animal stepping on them, they fit the definition of a technology whose scope of destruction cannot be limited. Then, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons (CCW) came in 1980. Protocol 2 of CCW banned the use of mines to target civilians or to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering to soldiers. It also prohibited the use of and transfer of non-detectable anti-personnel mines, mines specifically designed to be not detectable by traditional methods like metal detectors, and the use of non-self-destructing or non-self-deactivating mines outside of fenced, monitored, and marked areas. CCV was a step in the right direction, but not enough. For the reasons we will come to, a comprehensive ban was and still is the only option. In 1991, 6 NGOs started organizing the International Campaign to Ban Landmines (ICBL) to ban landmines. In 1992, ICBL was founded and its steering committee called for an international ban on the use, production, stockpiling, and sale, transfer, or export of anti-personnel landmines. In 1992, two very important reports, the US Department of State's Hidden Killer, The Global Problem with Uncleared Landmines, and ICBL's Landmines, A Deadly Legacy, were published. Both are heavily quoted in this video. In 1994, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Cornelius Sommaruga, declared that from a humanitarian point of view, a worldwide ban on anti-personnel mines is the only truly effective solution and came to terms with the problem. Subsequently, certain high UN bodies like UNHCR, United Nations Children's Fund, and the Secretary General himself called for a total ban on anti-personnel mines. And finally, on 15 December 1994, the UN General Assembly called for a moratorium on the export of anti-personnel mines by adopting Resolution 4975D. In 1995, Belgium became the first country to ban anti-personnel mines. Subsequently, the Council of Europe adopted a common action on landmines, which included a common moratorium on the export of anti-personnel mines. From 25 September to 13 October 1995, the first review conference of the 1980 CCW was held in Vienna, Austria. In this conference and through 1995 and 1996, many improvements to CCW were proposed, but a consensus could not be reached. And at the end of the CCW conference in 1996, pro-ban countries left the UN mechanism and started a mechanism to sign an international treaty outside of the UN CCW review conference protocol. The first draft of what became the Ottawa Treaty was drafted by the Austrian delegate on 26 June 1996 at the Quaker UN office in Geneva to other pro-ban country delegates. Between 3 and 5 October 1996, the process that came to be known as the Ottawa process started, and after several additional conferences in Europe through 1997 and hard work of Canadian and Austrian diplomats and international activists, in Ottawa between 3 and 5 December, the Ottawa Convention in its final form was signed by 122 countries. The Ottawa Treaty was a huge success in the prevention of further contamination of the world, reducing mine casualties and eliminating landmines. Global casualties decreased from a peak of 25,000 to 5,000 today annually. Tens of thousands of kilometers of square land were cleared, 55 million landmines were destroyed, 87 countries destroyed their stockpiles, 33 countries were declared mine-free, the number of mine-producing countries decreased from 48 to 11. Outside a few conflicts, notably the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Myanmar Civil War, and the Syrian Civil War, landmine use almost entirely ceased, especially when compared to the 90s peak when landmines were a standard weapon in almost every conflict. Since the original 122 countries signed the Ottawa, 43 more have joined them. Even non-signatory countries like the US and China have decreased their stockpiles, engaged in clearing, and adhered to the transfer moratorium, at least until recently. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is the first significant test of the international community on the adherence to the Ottawa Treaty. Unfortunately, the international community has mostly failed. Since the beginning of the conflict, treaty signatories Ukraine and non-signatory Russia have both used landmines extensively, resulting in a 22% uptick in landmine casualties in 2022. In 2024, the United States broke a long-standing moratorium on the transfer of landmines and started transferring landmines to Ukraine. And in 2025, weeks before this video is being written, six Eastern European countries, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine, have withdrawn from the treaty, citing national security. As I speak, Poland and the Baltics are planning to mine their borders with Belarus and Russia, and many of these countries are exploring ways to restart landmine production. But why is that a bad thing? The most obvious objection to anti-personnel landmines is that they are indiscriminate. A landmine cannot distinguish between a soldier and a child. Therefore, it can be argued that landmines are against the Geneva Conventions. But this is not the only argument against landmines. Landmines as weapons cause horrific injuries and are often designed to not kill but maim to strain enemy logistics. It can be argued that this extent of injury and the design classifies as causing superfluous injury and unnecessary suffering, which is against Geneva Conventions. You can argue that CCV already bans mines that cause a superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering, but I would argue that there is no such thing as a humane landmine, as in principle a piece of explosive detonating explicitly when stepped or otherwise pressed on will, due to simple physics and biology, almost always cause amputations, which I think satisfies the requirement for superfluous injury. Landmines last very long. Romance mines still haunt the western deserts of Egypt, and Cambodia is still living the consequences of a war that started in 1967. So I argue that whatever short-term benefits in conflict that landmines do provide is far outweighed by the cost of long-term contamination of productive land. Landmines are dirt cheap in the short term, but in the long term they cost immense amounts of money. First, landmines need land to be on. This land is land that otherwise can be used for agriculture, grazing, conservation, or forestry. And when the immediate political conflict that results in the mines being laid is resolved, and they very often do before the mines expire, that land still cannot be used. And this is a huge cost in lost productivity. Another cost is the eventual cleaning cost. Because either to restore productivity, make border communities and border guards safer, or because over time mines get unstable and you really wouldn't want an unstable minefield for a variety of reasons that I am sure any sane person can understand. Minefields get cleaned sooner or later, and clearing a minefield is a very expensive and dangerous endeavor. The cost of clearing a single mine can reach up to $1,000, and for every 5,000 cleaned landmines, on average one deminer dies and two get injured. Landmines don't stay where you laid them. Over time, due to floods, soil movements, landslides, erosion, and so on, mines shift places inside the flagged area, even if they were in a flagged area, and they can even get outside of previously known mined areas. In Bosnia, Libya, Mozambique, Cambodia, and in Ukraine, when Russia blew up the Kakhovka Dam, mines were carried away by floodwaters and ended up in new areas and settlements. This is a particular danger I want to bring attention to in light of the recent talk of Poland mining the Belarusian border, as a big portion of the Poland-Belarus border is made out by the Bug River, a river notorious for flooding, and just downstream lies the city of Brest with 350,000 people in it. It is not unlikely that if Poland mines the Bug River floodplain, the seasonal flooding of the Bug will carry mines downstream directly into Brest, without doubt taking lives directly and indirectly by delaying rescue operations and killing people. Landmines are a huge environmental hazard. They often include heavy metals that leak into the ground and water around them, and poison large tracts of land for the foreseeable future unless another very costly decontamination effort is undertaken. Landmines kill and fragment the population of wildlife, resulting in habitat fragmentation, genetic diversity loss, threats to endangered species, especially megafauna, and animals with expansive ranges. I again want to call attention to the Poland-Belarus border as the largest remaining primeval forest of Europe. The ancient Bialowieza forest, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, crosses the border and hosts the largest free European bison population in the world, among many other endangered animals. Mining in or around the forest will do irreparable damage to the forest as a continuous habitat and threaten the European bison. A country producing landmines is a threat to the entire world, as continuous production of landmines in one country keeps the expertise required, machinery, parts, explosives needed for producing landmines alive, and produces mines that can be transferred to other countries in the other parts of the world. For example, it is not unlikely that, say, a Polish landmine casing machine or the machines of a contractor Poland or Finland is keeping alive now by ordering new machines will end up in a Vietnamese or Indian or Armenian landmine factory a decade or so later. Proliferation hurts everyone. Withdrawing from the Ottawa Treaty the moment the treaty is actually put to test is very bad precedent. International humanitarian law is supposed to stand conflict, not go out the window the moment tension rises. After all these reasons, I think we should have been convinced that landmines should be banned. But if you are still on the fence, a quick fact for you, landmines don't work. Without fire cover over the minefield, an army with basic mine clearing equipment, which is basically alarmist in the moment, can cross a minefield in hours, demonstrated by the US Army in the Gulf Wars and numerous war games by NATO and Russia in the 1990s and 2000s. A minefield on its own is not effective. It needs fire cover. And if you can provide fire cover, modern war doctrine dictates a fluid and layered defense, not a big minefield. Also, minefields go both ways. Your enemy on paper can't cross them, but neither can you. So minefields limit mobility for both sides. Another point is we are talking about anti-personnel mines, and this is not the age of mass infantry assaults. Even the original purpose of the anti-personnel mines were to prevent anti-tank mines from being removed. While demining technology moved on, now military demining is the armor corps and artillery's job with line charges and rover blades. So anti-personnel mines offer little to no value in the modern battlefield other than a false sense of security or to deny an area very quickly with immense long-term costs. I personally don't think it's worth it, but even if you think it is worth it from a military standpoint, other international humanitarian law principles still demand a total ban. An important point of discussion in Ottawa was, and today still is, the matter of self-destructing landmines. The most obvious problem with them is a big percentage of them fail to detonate. But this is just one concern. Another concern is during their lifetime they cannot distinguish between soldiers and civilians. So when front lines shift, for example, in Ukraine, when the front line moved in 2022 with Ukrainian counteroffensives, and people return, they still find a minefield in their home. An additional concern is contamination. Even if these mines explode and don't leak any heavy metals, they still produce fragments when they explode, which is itself a contaminant. Also, exploding after a certain period of time doesn't make the effects on soldiers any less horrific, which is still banned under the Geneva Conventions as superfluous injury. At last, I want to address my countrymen from Turkey about why Turkey should be in the Ottawa Treaty, and to Eastern Europeans about why they should remain in the Ottawa Treaty even in the face of Russian aggression. In Turkey, the Ottawa Treaty is discussed within the scope of border security. The common argument is that the Syrian and Afghan refugee crisis happened or were exacerbated by the demining of respectively the Syrian and Iranian borders. First, I must say that I find this argument inherently inhuman and against international humanitarian law, as it suggests preventing people from seeking a fundamental human right, the right to refuge, by threats of getting maimed or killed, and those who, despite this risk, try to cross the border should get blown up by a mine. But I have to explain the situation regardless because of unfortunate rampant xenophobia in Turkey. So, most Syrians enter Turkey by or near official border crossings, but by using illegal means, which is in this situation does not matter at all, as the 1951 Refugee Convention bans criminalizing refugees that cross borders illegally if the place they escaped from threatening their life or freedom, and Syria in 2013 is like literally the definition of that. So the demining of the border did not cause a mass entry into Turkey from all across the now demined border, as most entered through official crossings, and the actual reason why Syrians were able to enter not only Turkey but Lebanon and Jordan too was a humanitarian open door policy, not the demining of the border. Another thing is that the difficulty of crossing a border does not significantly influence how many people cross it. At best, it just restricts the flow from one part of the border to another of the more dangerous part. The thing that is causing people to escape is the primary factor in how many people cross a border, which is in Syria's case was the rise of ISIS, the total collapse of the Syrian economy, and arguably the most devastating civil war of the 21st century so far. So mining the border would not have prevented the refugee flow in 2013, it would have just made it more dangerous for everyone involved. Another point is the Syrian regime tried to mine the border to prevent escapes, but it didn't work. Also, smugglers and militants regularly crossed the border for decades despite the mines, and the only thing that the minefields actually did was fence off large areas and cause casualties among border communities and border guards. For Eastern Europeans, I totally understand and sympathize with your justified fear of Russian aggression. However, for all the reasons I mentioned before, I think landmines should not play a role in your defense, and it wouldn't do much good anyway. Mining the entire Belarusian and Russian borders of the five withdrawn NATO members would take 3,665 kilometers. If you mine that border at a 5 kilometer depth, it is 18,325 square kilometers, which is almost half the size of Estonia. I find sacrificing land as big as half of Estonia to a weapon this bad, which lasts for more than the entire duration of the Cold War, to the threats of Russia, a state with an army that is using golf carts as assault vehicles, not the most appropriate of responses. Also, the cost of acquiring that much land draws productivity from its discontinued use, the actual mining, fencing, flagging, and so on costs, and the cost of the eventual cleaning can be spent far better than laying minefields, namely donating military equipment to Ukraine. A good option could be, in addition to this, improving the infrastructure of the Baltic countries to their connection with Western Europe to improve NATO security and response times. Another key point is that the thing that will defend Estonia or Latvia from Russia is not anything Estonia or Latvia alone could do. They are very small countries. They can't stand alone against a country as big as Russia. The actual shield of these countries is not mines, it is not military equipment, it is not conscription, it is NATO. And improving NATO coordination and commitments is the best thing Eastern European countries can do for their security. Now, what can you do for a landmine-free world if you feel touched by this video and want to help in any way? There are many things you can, as an individual, do to clean the world of landmines and protect the Ottawa Treaty. First and foremost, if you are in a non-signatory state or a state that is considering withdrawing, just message your local representative and encourage them to support signing or staying in the Ottawa, and just let them know that you are passionate about this issue and at least know about it. If you are in a state that is a party to the treaty and does not intend to withdraw, or you want to do more, you can donate to the Hazardous Area Life Support Organization Trust, or the HALO Trust for short. They are the oldest demining NGO in the world, as they were founded in 1988 and the biggest with over 8,000 deminers and support personnel. Their link is in the description. You can learn more about them there. Thank you for listening to me. All my references and related links are in the description. This is my first video, so please be nice to me, I guess.